All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Today's daf is Ayin Gimel. We are picking up in Metzia Hashem on Ayin Beis, and with Beis a lot to do today. And we are picking up at the Tan Rabbanon, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, about 15 or 16 lines up from the bottom. The last word on the line is Tan Rabbanon. So says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanon. Ein poskin ala peros ad sheyetze hashar. So remember again, we learned in the Mishnah that you cannot make forward contracts on peros unless, of course, the market price is set. Yotza hashar poskin, and once the market price becomes available, so we do make forward contracts. And afal pi she'ein lo zeh yesh lo zeh. And I remember again, under normal circumstances, in an ideal sense, what we want is yesh lo. We want the merchant to have possession of the actual produce. But even if he doesn't, it's not a big deal. Why? Because even if one merchant doesn't have produce, there'll always be another merchant who doesn't have produce. So we'll say if new grain, for example, was selling for 4 sa'ah for a selah, and old grain was selling for 3 sa'ah for a selah, it's actually quite interesting that old grain is actually worth more than new grain, because new grain still has the moisture locked in. So that moisture, A, takes up certain volume, and B, makes the crop more susceptible to rotting, as opposed to old grain, which is already dried out, is therefore worth more. So therefore, again, if new wheat was selling 4 sa'ah for a selah, old wheat selling 3 sa'ah for a selah, in poskin ashi yetze hashar lechadash aliyashan. You can't make forward contracts until the value for both old and new wheat, I should say new and old wheat, was known. Hayu lekutos me'arba ulechal adam mishlosh. Most things are actually very interesting. If the lekutos were selling their grain for 4 sa'ah for a zuz, and everyone else was selling for 3 sa'ah for a zuz. So we'll say, so first of all, who are the lekutos? Remember, we spoke, the lekutos are the gleaners. And now remember, again, the first people to often sell grain were the aniyim, were the poor. Because remember, again, the aniyim are entitled to certain agricultural tithes, and the truth is they can do whatever they want with what they get from the field. They could use it, they could eat it, they could sell it. So the lekutos means the gleaners. So we'll say, so what would happen over here? Let's say that lekutos me'arba v'chol adam mishalosh. The price for the lekutos, right? The price the lekutos was charging was 4 sa'ah for a selah, and everyone else was 3 sa'ah for a selah. In poskin ashi yetze hashar lelokei l'mocher. Ultimately, again, you have to wait until the market establishes the price, both for the gleaners as well as for the regular sellers. Amar Rav Nachman, poskin lekutos keshar lekutos. Rav Nachman says, no, you can go ahead and sell. You could enter into contracts with lekutos, with gleaners, in accordance with the market price for the gleaners, and ultimately, keshar lekutos. Amar Rav Nachman, ma'ishna locate. So why is that? Meaning, why is it that even if the general market price is not set, but the gleaner's market price is set, that you can go ahead and enter into forward contracts? Very simple. Amar Rav Nachman, ma'ishna locate the islay, ma'ishna locate the leslay Yosef milakot chavere. So because at the end of the day, if this gleaner doesn't have, what could he do? He could always get produce from his friends. So we'll say because produce is always accessible, therefore what? Therefore again, even if one doesn't have it, because he could easily get it from his friend, it's as if he's in possession of it, and therefore the forward future contract is going to be permitted. Balabayis nami Yosef milakit. So I don't say the same thing. Let the balabas make a future forward contract, because even if he doesn't have the produce, he could always what? Get it from the gleaner as well. It is embarrassing for the balabas to go ahead and get produce from the gleaner. In other words, we'll say that's not what happens. That's not what a balabas is not going to go. If I own a store, I'm a balabas, I'm not going to a gleaner who's an ani to go ahead and get additional wheat. The other possibility is, the other possibility we'll say is that when you buy produce from a balabas as opposed to a gleaner, what I'm buying is quality produce. So the idea is that you can't substitute balabas produce ultimately again with gleaner produce. Okay? Amar Rav Sheshes, Amar Rav Huna. Ein lovin al shar shebashuk. So we'll say now comes along a different case. You cannot borrow based on the market price. Now what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. It's 5 lines up from the end of Rashi. Ein lovin al shar shebashuk. Anisha Matis, Rashi says, I've heard that what this case is the following. Ein lovin ma'os b'derech halva. You can't borrow money. Amanas she'im lo tishalim lecha ma'os azman ploni. Etain l'cha peiros kishar shel achshav. So we'll say. So now what the Gemara seems to be saying is, Rav Sheshes is saying, is you cannot structure the following transaction. I borrow money from Ruvain, I borrow $1,000 from Ruvain, and I say to Ruvain that in the event that I can't pay back $1,000, I will give you $1,000 of fruit in accordance with the value of that fruit as of today. As of today. So says Rav Sheshes, you can't go ahead and structure such a transaction. Rashi says why? Because even though under normal circumstances, transacting a business transaction like this is going to be fine. Derech halva'a aser. So we'll say, even though future forward contracts are okay, that's only in the course of mekach or memkar. But once it involves a halva, once it involves a loan, then we run the possibility that's what? That it could ultimately result in ribis. Derech halva aser. So it says back to the Gemara. Rashi quotes another opinion about this case. We don't have to get into it. So it says the Gemara the following: Amar Rav Yosef bar Chama Rav Sheshes. Amar Rav Yosef bar Abba Rav Sheshes. Umi Amar Rav Huna hachi. Did Rav Huna really say this? V'haboi minei Rav Huna. But yet they asked the following shayla of Rav Huna. Hani b'nei Beirav. These Talmidei Chachamim. Or should say these Torah students. Diyasfi b'Tishrei upari b'Teves. They borrow in Tishrei and they repay in Teves. Now look at Rashi. Diyasfi b'Tishrei. They borrow money in Tishrei. Upari peiros b'Teves. And they pay back in produce in Teves. But what's the chap? Kishar shel Tishrei. So we'll say, but yet again, we see that the boys from the yeshiva were always doing transactions like this. They would borrow money in Tishrei and pay back in Teves with produce, but they would pay back in Teves in produce with the prices of Tishrei. So we'll say that's called repayment of a loan in forward future contract terms. So remember again, all what's happening over here is we're taking this concept of a forward future contract, which we've said is permitted, right? Which means again, I buy produce now at a price that is determined now, but I will not take possession of the fruit until some later time. So remember again, a transaction like that is going to be permitted as long as what? As long as Yeshlo, the merchant has, and Yatza Hashar, and the marketplace. Now, in truth, the reality is you don't actually need both of those. We established only need one of them, but Lamaisa, we'll just talk about both of them as being two cohesive criteria for the framework. Now what the Gemara is suggesting is almost like a spin-off of that case, where I borrow money now with the intent to repay it at a certain date, but in the event that I don't repay it, or even it could be lechatchila structured this way, I'm going to repay with produce at a later date, but the value of that produce is locked in as of now, as in the time of the loan. So both say, so if Sheshes wanted to say that according to Rav Huna, such a transaction would be asr because again it looks like ribis. The Gemara is now challenging that and saying Rav Huna is on record as saying that this is absolutely fine. The Torah students were doing this. To which the Gemara says, Amalahu ha chiti behini va chiti b'shili. See, here's the difference of both sides. Because at the end of the day, there is always cheap wheat available in Hini and Shili. Therefore, again, even if for argument's sake the price of wheat goes up in Teves, at the end of the day they could always secure wheat at a lower price should they choose. Savar Rav Huna ein lovin. So originally Rav Huna thought that such a transaction was going to be prohibited. Kevan d'shama lahad amar shvar b'chi amar belazar lovin amar ihu nami lovin. So what's essentially, to make a long story short, Rav Huna changed his mind. It's okay in life to change your mind. So originally he thought that such a transaction would be asr, but then ultimately again, after conferring with his fellow rabbinic colleagues, recognized that ultimately again it is mutter. So we'll say, and that indeed, so now we see just an interesting idea, another variation of the case of poskin of psika ala peros, that not only can you have a future forward contract when it involves peros at every stage, but even if it involves a loan, it'll also be permitted. Therefore, in a case where I borrow money and I say I will repay the money ultimately again with produce at a particular date, with the value of that produce being locked in as of now, technically speaking, such a transaction will be mutter. Fine. We'll say last two lines, ayin beis and beis. Ten rabbanim. We'll say now we're going to learn the brayso. Hamolich chavila mimakom lemakom. So let's listen to this case. I'm carrying a package from one place to another. Right? Rashi says, now why am I carrying it? Rashi said, mimakom lemakom, mimakom azol lemakom ayokos. We'll say I have merchandise, and in city A, the merchandise sells for X. In city B, it sells for X plus Y. So obviously, if I'm a merchant, my intention is to take my produce to the, or merchandise, doesn't have to be produce, to the place ultimately where I could sell it for more money. That's what I'm doing. I'm transporting my merchandise from place A to place B, because in B I can sell it for more money. Now what happens? Listen to this case. So my friend finds me as I'm making my way to city B to sell my merchandise for more money. And he says to me, Va'amarlo, Tineli, give it to me. Va'ani ela lecha k'derech shema'alin lecha ba'osam makom. And you know what I'll do? Rashi says over here, Tineli, va'olichna ve'eset sarchi b'ma'os azman ploni. So do me a favor, give it to me, and I will go ahead and sell it for the higher price that you had wanted. Now, of course, I will say, now the chap over here is, now why would somebody do this? It's nice to think that he's doing his friend a favor, but remember again, what he also has is, and I'll give you the money at a certain date. So in other words, what the friend gets is the use of the money for a particular amount of time. So we'll say, so what's taloch? Is such a transaction going to be permitted or not? So the Gemara says, well, it depends. Top of Ayin Gimel. Birshus mochar mutter. So we'll say, if the way this transaction is set up is that the original owner of the merchandise bears full responsibility for the merchandise, then such a setup will be mutter. Why do I say? Because if the owner of the merchandise bears full responsibility for the merchandise, what's the nature of this agreement? It's a shlichus, right? Remember again, let me be clear. You're saying good in the next case, right? If the owner of the merchandise bears the full responsibility, then essentially the friend is my shaliach, right? If I'm the owner of the merchandise, I'm going to sell it in place B because I can sell it there for more money. Reuven says, listen, I'll take care of it for you, and I'll give you the money in 2 months from now. So essentially what's happening over here is Reuven wants the use of the money for 2 months. So if I bear full responsibility for the merchandise, then meaning it's mine, I'm not lending or doing anything. Reuven is acting as my shaliach, therefore there are no ribis implications. Look at Rashi. Birshus mocher, im kibel alav mocher achrayis haderech. So if the seller, right, calling the mocher, but the mocher ultimately again means that that's the owner of the property, then mutter. De'in kan milva ad shetimkar v'chol ma shenimkar biyoker shal bailam harishonimu. Then in reality, again, this money is mine, the owner of the object, and I'm allowing ultimately, again, Reuven to use this money until a particular time. However, Bershus Lokeach, but Rabbi say ultimately, again, if responsibility for the merchandise rests with Reuven, then Aser. Look at Rashi, Bershus Lokeach, Temehashta milva hugabe, v'yoyev le tofina midamei berebisa. So we'll say, here's the problem. If I hand over that merchandise to Reuven, and Reuven takes full responsibility for it, then remember again, what's happening over here is I'm giving him that merchandise in a place where it's worth X. And he's essentially agreeing to what? Pay me back X plus Y. And why is he agreeing to pay me back more than the item is worth right here and now? And what's the answer to that? Because he's getting use of the money for a protracted period of time. And we call that ribis. So we'll say, again, now I want to be clear. Remember, none of this is daraisa ribis, right? This is avak ribis. These will all be dirabanan cases of ribis, but ribis nevertheless. So it says the Gemara over here, so in that case, we call him the lokeach, we call him the purchaser. But in reality, he's the friend who's doing the favor. So the mice in a case like that, where he takes full responsibility, it becomes a halva, because remember again, as I was mentioning before, any time you take full responsibility for something, it effectively becomes a halva. So now, at this case where the friend is taking full responsibility for the object, it becomes a halva. He's willing to pay me back more than what it's worth right now where we're standing for the right to use the funds. That's called ribis. So says the Gemara, next case. So again, we'll say next case, I'm taking fruits from one place to another. So I'm taking my produce from location A to location B. Same thing. I'm taking it to B because I want to be able to sell it for more money. Matzah chavero va'amarlo, to name Li. So we'll say, so what happens? So I find, my friend finds me as I'm going to city B, and he says, listen, give it to me. Va'ani ela l'chapero sheyesh li ba'osam makom. Oh, so we'll say, this is a little bit of a different case. See, he says what? Listen, do me a favor. Let me have your payros now, and I'll give you, I have payros, you're going to city B, I happen to have payros there, I'll give you payros in city B. So remember again, we made reference to cases like this, Under normal cases, we call this sa'ah b'sa'ah, right? Lending one measure of produce for another measure of produce, which we normally say is aser. So look at Rashi, to namely, va'ochlem kan. So do me a favor, give me the produce that you have here. I'd like to consume it. Meaning, both say in this case over here, remember, in this case, Reuven is not looking to make money off the merchandise. Reuven is looking to eat the fruit. So he's saying, Silber, you're going from city A to city B. I happen to have produce in B. Let me have your fruit now, right? I'll consume your fruit, and I'll give you the same fruit, so to speak. When you get to city B, you can sell it in city B for a higher price. So what's the halacha? So also remember again, we discussed this. If Reuven actually has produce in city B, then it's going to be mutter. The imlav aser. But if he doesn't have produce in city B, then what? Then the transaction is going to be aser. Look at Rashi. Yesh lo sham mutter. Because it will say when Reuven has peiros in city B, so essentially when I give him my fruit, I pretty much automatically acquire title to his fruit. I will say even though it's not totally true, we already learned that with movable property one requires meshicha, but lamaisa at the end of the day, to avoid the ribis problems, it's as if I acquired it. So since he has that fruit in location B, I acquire that fruit while I'm still in location A. And even though I didn't do Mashicha on that produce of Reuven's, so we'll say, because in this case of Sa'ab B'Sa'ah, we would normally be dealing with rabbinic ribis. So because of that, I will say the rabbis legislated that when the other party has produce in their possession, therefore it's not the prohibition of Sa'ab B'Sa'ah, and therefore it will be mutter. V'chamarin, and we'll say chamarin are donkey drivers. So who are merchants? So the chamarin ma'alin mimakom hayoker ki makom hazol ve'enon chosh. And we'll say that's actually an interesting case. So look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says v'chamarin ma'alin b'makom hayoker ki makom hazol ve'enon choshishin. Says Rashi hachamarim hamistakrim bitvua. So we'll say ultimately you have donkey drivers who are wheat merchants. So we'll say, remember again, so everybody's doing the same thing. They're bringing the wheat from a place where it's sold at a discount to a place where it's sold at a premium. So we'll say, just so you understand, where did this happen? Villages normally had lower merchandise prices, produce prices, than cities. For the simple reason that villages had much easier access to produce because they were surrounded by fields versus cities that had much less access to produce. So if I'm a donkey driver, what I'm doing is I'm taking my produce from the villages or I'll buy in the villages and I'm going to take it to the cities to sell for more money. So says the Gemara, listen to this. So therefore the donkey drivers who bring the produce from the villages to the bigger cities, they are permitted to go ahead and take advance payments from balabatim, rich balabatim in the city, in order to go ahead, essentially, this is a future forward contract to be able to go ahead and to buy produce. So essentially, if I'm a rich man living in the city, I find my guy, I have my donkey driver, I advance him the cash, buy wheat in accordance with the price in the villages, meaning the cheaper price, with the understanding that I'm going to take possession of that wheat at some future time. I'm just finishing Rashi. Ben Choshishin Sheyehei Ribis Schar Hamtanas Mauskin Farshazon. I will say in this case there is no concern about ribis. My time, what's the reason for that? Rapapa Amar Necha Lahu Demiglo Lahu Tara. So we'll say because it is in the best interest. Ultimately, again, there is a benefit. Ultimately, again, that the donkey drivers get. Why? Demiglo Lahu Tara. Rashi says over here Sha'alidei Ma'usav Shalzeh. If you're a donkey driver and you're walking around with cash, so literally again, doors open for you. In other words, to be able to walk into the marketplace with a lot of cash makes you a gavra, makes you someone important. Therefore, again, the donkey driver has a benefit from this transaction as well. Also, when you have more cash and more buying power, the more buying power you have, the better your ability to go ahead and negotiate better prices. My ben Arabas, what is practical difference between these two opinions? Tagra charata. Both sides, ultimately, the nafkamini would be someone who is a new merchant, right? So someone who is a new merchant could still open doors with his wad of cash, but may not be able to negotiate discounts because Lamaisi is not well known. Besura azli arba, bekafri azlan shisa. So we'll say, so again, listen to this. So in Surah, Rashi says over here, Rashi says, Besura azli arba, giruye bezuza. So we'll say, in Surah, you'd be able to buy four measures, for a zuz, and bekafri, now we'll say, kafri can mean one of two things. Kafri, Rashi says, shem makom. So others, like the Rashi and others understand that kafri actually means like a kfar, a village, whereas Surah is the city, kafri is a village, but Rashi says over here that's actually the name of a place. So Rashi says in Surah they used to sell this merchandise. They used to sell the azli arba. The produce would be four units for a zuz, and in kafri it would be 6 units for a zuz. Okay, what happened? Yoiv Rav Zuzi Lachamri. So Rav went ahead and gave a zuz to the donkey driver. The kabil ale onsa the archa. So we'll say, so Rav, who lived in Surah, gave a zuz ultimately to a donkey driver in order to what? For the donkey driver to go and purchase for him produce in the cheaper place. Now the chap over here is that Rav accepted all of the onsin upon himself. Right? Rav accepted all of the onsin. So should something happen to the money, should something happen to the produce, so Rav accepted all of the responsibility. So we'll say, now remember again, based on what we said before, if you go ahead and you accept all responsibility, that allows you to reap the benefits of the transaction without any concern of ribis. Why? Because there is no halva, there is no loan that is taking place. Instead, what's happening over here? This is simply a shlichus. This is an act of agency. But listen to this. V'shakal minayhu chamisha. But yet, interestingly enough, Rav only took 5 units of merchandise for his zuz. I would ask the Gemara of Nishkal Shisa, but why not go ahead and what? Why not take 6? Meaning, after all, again, he's entitled to take 6. To which the Gemara gives a very interesting answer. Adam Chashuv Shaini. We'll say Adam Chashuv, an important person, is different. Now, what does Adam Chashuv Shaini? As I will say, you've seen this concept before, that a Talmud Chacham, an Adam Chashuv, has to conduct himself in a different way that quote-unquote regular people do. And he has to go ahead and avoid any kind of even potential appearance of wrongdoing. See, even though what Rav is doing is absolutely permitted and absolutely legal, meaning to go ahead and give the zuz and get the 6 units of merchandise, because someone could erroneously go ahead and assume that perhaps he's earning interest on his investment, he chose not to go ahead and take the full amount. Again, not required halachically, but a higher standard to which he held himself. So Rabbi Asi asks Rabbi Yochanan, Ma'u lasos bigrutos. So we'll say, so what is the halacha? Look at Rashi. Ma'u lasos bigrutos came b'shar pragmatia. Kigon shivrei zav v'kasef v'shamini metachos mi aminon tevua demidi deshachich hu deazli v'asukol shait aminon echalei demiglutara inami demazlu gabayu avashar pragmatia leke gilulei tara v'lo azli gabayu v'lo azli gabayu demi shemachar lo achshav lo yikol amach. So we'll say, so the shaila is the following. We've been speaking about, let's say, this case with advancing the more expensive value to the donkey driver for the purchase of wheat. Is this dafka din in produce, or does this apply? But say literally, gurtos means shards of utensils. Or Rashi says again, Rashi's lashon is any other type of merchandise. In other words, the question is, does this apply to non-produce type of merchandise as well? This the Gemara says, Amarle. Amarle BK Shabishal Rabbi Yossi Lasos came Biklei Pishtan. So the Gemara says Rabbi Yossi wanted to set up a transaction like this with linen garments. Velohi nichu Rebbe, and Rebbe did not allow him to do that, which indicates to us what Rabbi was saying, that Lamaisa again, that your one is only permitted to do this with produce and not with other items. The logic behind that being is that ultimately produce is readily available. So it's easier to do these kind of things with items that are readily available, but perhaps again other types of merchandise will not be as readily available. Amri, others have the version of the story that Rebbe wanted to do this, and Rabbi Yossi would not let him do it. Fine. Pardisa. So we'll say, look at this case. Rashi says, Pardisa, liknos yamin akerem b'damim pechusim, kol pero shonazu bekach bekach, lochin acher shein boser osmadar, aval adayin lo gila bikos. So also listen to this. I want to go ahead and create a future forward contract with a vineyard. I want to go ahead and buy wine. I want to buy wine from the vineyard at a reduced rate, but I'm not going to take possession of the wine until later on. So is this a permitted situation? Rav Asar, Shmuel Shari. Rav says it's Asar, Shmuel says it's permitted. Look at Rashi. Rav Asar, Dimishum hakdamas maos lizman habatzir kamozil gabe vahavi agar natrale. So both say Rav says this is Asar because what's going to happen? The owner of the vineyard is going to discount the value. Ultimately, again, because he's getting the money now, even though the purchaser is not going to take possession until later. Well, so remember again, any time that you give someone something for a cheaper amount of money because you have the use of the funds, that's called ribis. That's called ribis. So Rav says this is Asr. Shmuel says that it's mutter. So we'll say, let's analyze this. So it says the Gemara, Rav Amar Asr. Rav says Asr, ki vandalakame shavia tvei, mischazi ki agar natrale. So we'll say, Rav will say that it's Asr. Why? Because since, again, it is actually worth more, it appears that the reason the discount is being given is because the funds are being advanced. Ushmuel Shari, Shmuel says, Kevan dahavi beit tiyuha lo mechse ki agar natrale. We'll say Shmuel says that there's another issue over here. The reason why, if you prepay for wine, you get a discount is not because somebody is not because person gets the use of the funds for a longer amount of time, therefore gives you a discount. The issue over here is when you buy wine now to take delivery for later, there is a certain level of risk that is involved. What's the level of risk? Something could happen to the vineyard, ultimately in the interim. Look at Rashi. Kevan dahavi beit tiyuha, pamim shish kilkul bekerem. Sometimes the vineyard gets destroyed. Kigon, barad, o geshamim, o kerach. It hails, it rains, it's ice. Umafsid hakol, and ultimately again everything is lost. Umakabel alav kol sveke hefsid, and we'll also remember again in this case where I am prepaying for the wine. But what am I doing? I'm accepting upon myself anything that may happen. So therefore, because there's an element of risk, that's why the price is discounted. It has nothing to do ultimately again with ribis. Amar of Sim Barchia umodi Rav bituri dinafish psadayu. So we'll say Rav would agree that a forward contract for wine at a discount is going to be permitted in a case where the owner of the vineyard cares for his vineyard with an ox. Right? To both say again, oxen and vineyards is a very dangerous combination because the oxen could easily go ahead and trample on the vines. So, but nevertheless, there were people who still had to take care of their vineyards with oxen. So someone like that, where there's definitely going to be some type of damage, it's the prepaid, the forward contract for wine will not be an issue with damages. Will not be an issue with ribis. I'm sorry. Amrluhu Shmuel, lahano the shavshi shivsha. So we'll say Shmuel said to these, who are the shavshi shivsha? Look at Rashi. Bali batim hamalavim tvuah la'arisim lezera u'mishalmin lahem legorin tvuah chadasha. So we'll say shavshi shivsha are the balabatim who lend seed to arisim, to sharecroppers, for the sharecroppers to go ahead and plant the seeds. And ultimately, again, the sharecroppers, or I should say the owners of the field, will pay the sharecroppers from the new crop that comes about. So Shmuel used to say to them, Hafuchu ba'ara, make sure to till the soil, in order that you have the actual acquisition in the land itself. Because if you don't, then ultimately, again, this will be like a loan, like a sa'a bis-sa'a loan, and ultimately it will be aser. Amrluhu Rav al'ano demantri ba'agi. So Ravi used to say to these individuals, we'll say, look at Rashi, mantri ba'agi, shomri hakamos ad hakatzir. These people who used to go ahead and watch the standing wheat until the time of harvest. Go ahead and make sure that you go ahead. Literally means turn over the wheat. In other words, actively involve yourself physically in the threshing floor. In order that your employment not terminate until literally the end of this process. Because also when you hire someone to do something, they are paid in accordance with the rates at the end of the schirus. Therefore, the longer that you are involved, the better the chance you have to share in the profits if the produce appreciates. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Actually, no, we have to look at Rashi. Fine. So it says the Gemara. Fine. I'm sorry. Yeah, Vahishaita Azuli Kamozli Gabayhu. So Amru Shabbos say, and again, so he was encouraging them, make sure to remain involved in the threshing process until the end, because they say when they calculate the amount of your wages, it'll be calculated based on current prices now. Amrulei Rabbanan the Rabba. So we'll say the Rabbanan said to the Rabba, Amrulei Rabbanan the Rabba, Ka'achil Mar Ribis. So we'll say the Rabbanan approached Rabba, they said, Rabba, you are consuming ribis. You are in violation of the laws of ribis. How so? Because it will say everyone else. Look at Rashi. Shakli arba. It will say it's the third and wide line in Rashi. Rashi say 4 lines up from the bottom. Shkuli alma shakli arba. Everyone takes kurin bechachirus hasada. Everyone ultimately again takes 4 measures, 4 core of wheat. For a field, if I own a field and I'm giving it to sharecroppers, so the owner would take 4 core of wheat per field. So the Gemara says, and everyone sends home their sharecroppers in Nisan. Mar notar le'ad iyar. So you Rava, you go ahead and you keep your sharecroppers working until iyar. V'shakal shisa. Furthermore, you're taking 6 core of wheat in payment ultimately again for your sharecropping. So to which the Gemara says, the ribis. So it says the Gemara, Amrluhu, Rabbi said to no. An asun ka'avidtun shlokidin. It's you guys who are not acting appropriately. How so? Ara la'aras mishtabid. In reality, again, the land is mishubad to the aras. Look at Rashi. Rashi is over here for just a moment. Asun hu da'aviditu shlokidin shata mesakin oso benisan v'adayin lo nismalei satvua bekashel umafsidon osan harbe va'ara la'arisa mishtabid ashetis bashal hatvua kol tzarcha hilchoch shlokidin hi kevsai. So we'll say the Rava says the following: the land is considered to be meshubad to the aris until the produce is fully matured. In Nisan, when you guys send away the aris, the produce is not fully mature. In order for the produce to be fully mature, both sides, it's not just that it has to finish growing, but some of the moisture has to leave it as well. So Rebbe said, I'm the one who's doing things correctly. I allow them to stay ultimately again until ER. The produce is dried out, the produce is complete, and therefore they benefit even more. So the Gemara says, I asun misaliko b'Nisan, mafsedisu luhu b'kama. Ana natarna ad ER. I keep them until ER. And as a result, they benefit greatly. Amudbeis. Rav Mari bar Rachel, mashkin lehahu nachri besas. We'll say another interesting case. So Rav Mari bar Rachel, so of course, what immediately catches our attention is that he's known by his mother's name. So Rashi tells her, it's a famous man. So Rashi tells the story. Rav Mari bar Rachel, bas shmo hasa. Rav Mari's daughter Rachel, was the daughter of Shmuel. The Nishbes, she was taken captive, and she was violated by her captor. She became pregnant in captivity. The Nasanach, now here's the amazing part. Her captor converted and married her. Ushmei Isser. His name was Isser. So Giura. Rav Mari horasa shlo biktusha v'leidasu biktusha. So we'll say Rav Mari's biological father was a Gentile, even though later on, ultimately, again, he converts. Now we'll say, again, on a technical level, from a Judaic perspective, that father, Isser, is not Rav Mari's father. Because remember, again, Rav Mari was conceived when his father was a Gentile. Of course, there's a biological connection to a Gentile father, but there is not a Judaic connection to a Gentile father. So it says, I'm sorry? So why his name was Isser is a different discussion. It's not Isser. No, it's not Isser like, hi, I'm violation. Nice to meet you. You know, you call me Avera for short. You know, right? No, it's not the. No, there's a whole Maisa with that name. But again, at the end of the day, we'll say, so remember, so therefore, out of kavod to Rav Mari was known simply as Bar Rachel. He was known by his mother's name. So Rav Mari Bar Rachel, Mashkin Leahu Nochri Beisa. Well, so listen to this. So Rav Mari Bar Rachel had gone ahead and lent money to a Gentile, and the Gentile had given him a home, ultimately as collateral. Okay, so Rav Mari has a collateralized home. Hadar Zabna Rava. Now, Rabbi said the Gentile went and sold that collateralized home to Rava. Now, remember, obviously, you are not allowed to sell collateralized property, right? So the Gentile sold collateralized property, and Rava did not know. So Rava didn't know. It didn't come up in the title search or whatever it is. He did not know this, that he bought a collateralized house. So what happened? So we'll say, so now, Rav Mari Baracha realizes that the home he has as collateral is now owned by Rava. So what does Rav Mari do? Notar Tresar Yarche Shasa. So we'll say, now Rav Mari lived in the home. Oh, now literally, Notar, I should read Rashi. Notar Shasa, Himton Rav Mari Shana Shlema. So Rav Mari lived in the home for a full year. At the end of that year, Shakal Agar Besa. Look at Rashi. Shakal Agar Besa. Mishana Haba Va'amti Rava. He brought the rent for the next year. So in year one, Rav Mari Baracha. So again, let's assume, right? Year one, where it was collateralized home, but it was already sold to Rava. Rav Mari lives there. In the beginning of year two, Rav Mari shows up at Rava's home with the full year's rent in hand for the home. So what happens? Amti Rava, and he brought it to Rava. Amrle, Haidelo Amtori Lemar Agar Beisa Ada Idna. So Rabbi, I want you to understand, even though you owned the home, I want you to understand why I didn't bring you rent until now. The Stam Mashkanta Shasa. Because Rabbi said, a Stam Mashkanta, a regular collateral, is assumed to be the property of the lender for a year. For a year. Therefore, again, Iboy Nachri Lesalki, Lahavi Matzi Misalik. We'll see what that means is that if a Gentile would try to remove the lender from the property, he would be unable to do so. Now, this is an interesting idea. This has to do, by the way, with the concept of, can you go ahead and not prepay? Well, I guess it would be prepay loan. Let's say I borrow money for a year. Can I go ahead and 6 months in, go ahead and pay off the debt? So we see that under certain circumstances, the answer to that is no. Why? Because it could be that part of the reason why the lender lent the money was because he has use of the mashko. Now again, how to structure that without ribis is something we're in the midst of discussing. So the Maisa, there are circumstances where a loan is made and the loan cannot be prepaid before the due date, because the lender has the use of the mashkon. So Rav Mari Barachal says, so I just want to make you understand the nature of this transaction with the Gentile, which, because we'll say in the transaction with the Gentile, the laws of ribis don't apply. The nature of this transaction was, I lent the money ultimately again to the Gentile, let's say for 5 years. And our agreement was, he cannot pay off the debt in the first year. Right? You can't pay off the debt in the first year. So therefore, I had unrestricted use of the mashkon. That mashkon was mine for the first year. So even though the Gentile in the interim sold that property to you, Rava, I didn't have to pay you Rava rent. Why? Because that mashkon is mine. That mashkon essentially is mine. However, again, hashta lishkama agravesa. But now at the end of the day, since technically speaking the Gentile could go ahead and pay off the debt, and thereby remove me from the mashkon, so technically it's no longer mine. Really, you now hold title to this home, and if I'm going to live there, I have to pay you rent. Amrle, to which Rava says, so Rava says, listen, had I known that this home was collateral to your debt, I would have never bought it. Therefore, hashta kidinehem avdinon. Therefore, let's conduct ourselves in accordance with the law, with literally their laws. Meaning, since this is a loan with a Gentile, let's go ahead and conduct it according to their laws. So the Gemara says, hashta kidinehem avdinon lecha. I will conduct myself in accordance with their laws towards you. Kol emas de lo mesalki bezuzi lo shakil agar beisa. Any time that ultimately the Gentile would not be able to go ahead and pay you off with money, so I will not go ahead and take rent. So the Gemara says, Ana nami lo shakilna minach agar beisa ad misakilna l'chabazuzi. Just like the Gentile could not take rent from you for the mashkon, as long as he did not repay the debt, so too Rava says to Amari, I will also not take money from you, not take rent from you until the debt is paid off. So we'll say, in other words, what Rava was doing was, he was yielding to the collateral lien that ultimately Rav Mari Barachal had on the property. Even though technically speaking, the halacha was on the side of Rava, that after this year, if Rav Mari wanted to continue to live there, we would have to give Rava rent. But Rava said, listen, because your claim preceded mine, even though I am the legal owner of this property, but because your claim came first, therefore what? I will not charge you any kind of rent until your debt is settled with the Nochri. Amrli Rava mi Barnish the Ravashi. So Rava Barnish says Ravashi. Chazi mar Rabbanan de Ka'achli Rabisa. See, the rabbis are taking ribbis. The rabbis are taking ribbis. Why? What are the rabbis doing? Because what are the rabbis doing? I will say, the rabbis are paying for wine in Tishrei, and they're only going ahead and choosing it, right, to only take possession of that wine in Teves. So is that not a look at Rashi for just a moment? Note lin yayin tov. So we'll say, so what happens? They prepay in Tishrei, where the prices are lower, and they're taking possession of the wine in Teves when the prices are higher. Says Rashi over here, Note li yayin tov, v'ihavu shakli le mitishrei, dil mahavi machmes. I will say, now had they taken possession of the wine already in Tishrei, it's possible that what? That by Teves, the wine perhaps would have gone sour. V'ashtachach timishum dakdimu ma'os b'tishrei, adayin lo yotza hashar, kibel alav hamocher achrayis. So we'll say, so therefore it turns out that's what? That since the Talmidei Chacham, these Rabbanim were willing to prepay, even though again, the real wine market, the value for wine did not yet come out because wine is not yet ready for consumption, nevertheless, the Mocher accepted all achrayis upon himself. And I will say what it looks like is that the wine seller is willing to go ahead and give something extra to the rabbinic purchasers because they're advancing the funds. And that ultimately sounds like ribbis. To which the Gemara says, Amrle inhu nami achamra kayoiv. Achala lo kayovi. To which he responded. So let's remember again, Rava of Barnish says back to Ravashi, it's true. Remember, these people, the Rabbanim, they want to purchase wine, they don't want to purchase vinegar. Me'ikara dechamra chamra, dechala chala. So we'll say, we assume that which is wine now in Teves would have also been wine back in Tishrei, and that which is vinegar now in Teves would have also been vinegar back in Tishrei. Hahi shaitur dekamavchir. So essentially, again, what they choose now would have effectively been the same product had they taken it back in Tishrei as well. Fine. Ravina hava yoav zuzi libnei akra dishanvasa. V'shavki leitfei kufisa. So we'll say, so what happened? So Ravina gave a zuz. If you look at Rashi, Libnei Akra de Shanvasa, Shanvasa Shem Hanar. So the people of Akra who lived by the Shanvasa river. So what happened, I will say? So Rabbeinu would go ahead and he bought wine from them. He bought wine. Now the nature of his transaction was he would prepay for the wine before even the harvest season of the grapes. And he would lock in a lower price and be able to go ahead and take possession of the wine later on. Fine. So it says the Gemara, I'm sorry? Oh, so good. So, and again, we already discussed why that is not a problem of ribbis. But here was the problem. When they would fill up his barrels, when they fill up his barrels, they would give him an extra pitcher of wine. So we'll say this actually is a very lemaisa case. See, he purchased something, and they threw in an extra bottle. So we'll say, he asked the following shayla. Mishari. So we'll say, here's the problem. Remember, just to be absolutely clear, Ravina did not ask for this. Ravina did not arrange this. This was not part of any kind of transaction. Just as again, almost like, seems like they were doing something nice. They gave him an extra, you prepaid, you bought this a while ago, we're giving you an extra bottle of wine. So Ravina asks, is this permitted or not? Amar lay in. To which ultimately Ravashi responded, yes, achuli hu de kamachol gabach. So we'll say Rashi says, achuli kod kamachol gabach, horrible pasakto imahem. You did not negotiate with this with them ahead of time. Umidai tam nostam lecha. They're giving this of their own volition. Ve'in maskir lom lecha b'scharcha ma'osecha. And they're not saying this, if they're not saying, we have so much gratitude that you prepaid for the wine, that we're giving you this, therefore, what to say? This is a gift. This is a gift, and because it's a gift, and there's no mention of it having any kind of connection to the prepayment or the transaction, it's going to be absolutely permitted. Amarle ha'ara lavdidohi. But he said, but here's the problem. These guys, these Bnei Akra, who live by the Shanvasa river, will say, they grow their wine on land that is not theirs. Now, what does that mean? So it says the Gemara, so as you will see in just a moment, Rashi says over here, they know So we'll say, listen to these guys. These Bnei Akra, who lived by the Shanvasa river, were very good businessmen. What did they do? They saw properties. What happened? The king assesses a property tax. there are people who could not pay their taxes. So what did they do? They ran away. So what did these guys do? The halacha in the kingdom was that if you pay the property taxes on a particular parcel of land, then guess what? You become the owner. So what do these guys do? Right? They keep track of the people, the runaway landowners, and as soon as these guys run away, they step in, pay the taxes, and take possession of the land. I'm sorry, it still happens? Right? Take possession of the land. So the mice, again, so Ravina was saying, look, isn't that theft? Meaning they're growing the grapes on land that is not theirs. Is that not theft? How can I partake of the wine? To which the Gemara says, Amalei, Ravina says, Ravash says, no, it's not theft. Meaning this is the law of the kingdom. The law of the kingdom is that ownership of the land is governed by property taxes. Umalka Amar Mandiyav Taska Lecho Ara. The king said, he who goes ahead and pays the taxes is permitted to go ahead and take possession of the land. Amar le Rapapa the Rava. So Rapapa said to Rava, Chazi mar hani rabbanan diyavi zuzi akarga de inshi umeshabdi behutfei. Supposed to listen to this. So Rapapa said to Rava, again the Rabbanon, right? The Rabbanim are not acting appropriately. Why? Because what are they doing? Remember, there was another type of tax called the karga. Karga is a head tax. So what were the Rabbanon doing? The Rabbanon, these rabbis are paying the head tax for certain people, and after they pay someone's head tax, umeshabdi behutfei, they make this guy work for him. So right, I see that Ruvain can't pay his head tax. I pay his head tax. Listen, since I pay your head tax, this sounds very, I own you, right? Meaning you come to work for me now. And the rabbis are taking advantage of these guys and working them very hard. Amrle, Hashta iku shachiva la amri luchu hamilsas. Well, it's actually a very interesting exchange. So remember again, Rav Papa saying this to Rav. Rav is saying, oh, I'm so happy I'm still alive. Because had I died, I would not be able to share with you the following teaching. Haki Amar Rav Sheshes Mihorkayu. This is what Rav Sheshes of Horkayu. So Rav say Horkayu is a place. This is what Rav Sheshes of Horkayu said. Tahani betafsa de Malka manach umalka Amar mandalo yoev karga lishtabid leman diyoev karga. So essentially what he answered is dina de malchusa dina. Dina de malchusa dina. The laws of the kingdom say that if a person does not pay his head tax and someone else pays the head tax on his behalf, that's what? That the person who paid the head tax has the right to make the one who didn't pay his head tax come and work for him. Rav Seuram Achod Rava Havatakif Inish Telo Malus. Let's listen to this. So Rav Seura, the brother of Rava, used to go ahead and conscript into his service Inshidlo Malu, men with bad reputation. I will say that Inshidlo Malu means usually men with a bad reputation, usually has some type of connotation ultimately of immorality. So what happens? So he went ahead and he Ma'ali Lahu Bigu Harka de Rava, and he would make them carry the wagon of Rava. Make them carry the wagon of Rava, right? So he'd go ahead, Rava would be like in a wagon, they'd make it now, Guharka Rashi says there is Agala Muchenes Lamerkalas Adam. So a special wagon that a person would be carried in. So he would make these guys of ill repute go ahead and carry the wagon. So the Gemara says, Amrli Rava, Shapir Kavarata. Rava says, you're doing good. It's a good thing. Why did Tanina? Ra'isa she'ina noi kishura, minayin shata rashay lishtabid bo. If you see a person who's not acting appropriately, how do you know that you're permitted to go in and put him to work? Talmud Lomar, because the pasuk says, Li'olam bahem ta'avodu uba'achechem. So we'll say, Li'olam bahem ta'avodu is a pasuk by an Evet Kanani. The Torah says you're supposed to keep your Evet Kanani forever, you're not supposed to free him. Uba'achechem, and with your brethren, which sounds like to us that there are times in which you could make your brother work for you. So the Gemara says, Yachal afilu noi kishura. I might have thought that's even true, even if my fellow Jew is acting appropriately, I could still put him to work. So we'll say, therefore, the pasuk says that what? That no, when my fellow Yisrael is acting like my brother, meaning he's keeping Torah mitzvos, then I should not go ahead and put him to work. But if he's acting inappropriately, I absolutely should put him to work. Now, you ask yourself, like, what's the logic over here? So first, they're darshaning a pasuk. So it's a beautiful Ben Yoyada. The Ben Yoyada says, Rabosai, when do people get themselves into trouble? When do they get themselves into trouble? When they have too much time on their hands. If you see someone who is steeped in immorality, chances are the reason is they have too much time at their disposal. What is the best way to help them remedy their issues? Put them to work. And by the way, the harder the work, that's why, if you notice again, that, who was it? It was Rava's brother. Who was Rava's brother? I'm sorry. Rav Suram put them to work in what? Manual labor. Because you know what the great thing about manual labor is? Great thing? Wears you out. Right? Person works in manual labor, very little energy to sin afterwards. So an incredible yisod. You see someone who's struggling with their ruchnius, sometimes the best thing you could do to them is put them to work. The harder the work, the more exerting the work, the more tiring the work, the better off they are. So we'll stop over here for now. We'll pick up Hashem here tomorrow. Calvin Coolidge, they wanted to make their producing solution, wanted like a 4-day